Israel, the Middle East's military and technological powerhouse, has been close to forming an alliance with Saudi Arabia, the region's economic titan and key oil supplier. Such a deal would have transformational impact on one of the most volatile regions on the planet, with repercussions felt across the global economy. Then, on the 7th of October, Hamas attacked Israel, sparking a brutal conflict that has the potential for serious escalation with far-reaching consequences. The endgame is anyone's guess. This video will examine the potential peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. It will look at the stakes involved, what the key players, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the US, and the Palestinian Authority, stand to gain from this deal, and what effect the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis could have on this deal. This is a big topic, but it's a really important one. Let's get going, shall we? First, I'll provide some context. On the 15th of September 2020, a monumental deal in the Middle East was brokered by the US. The Abraham Accords normalized diplomatic relations between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and potentially Sudan. I say potentially Sudan since relations have been froze due to domestic opposition and civil war in the North African country. The Abraham Accords were a breakthrough. To give you some perspective, it's been nearly 3 decades since an Arab state normalized relations with Israel. That was Jordan back in 1994. Egypt also had a peace treaty with Israel, which goes back to 1979. Those peace deals were vitally important, not only for Israel, but also for the US, which considers Israel its closest ally in the region, partly in recognition of those peace deals, and also as an effort to bolster the security of Israel's 2 largest neighbors. Egypt and Jordan have also been among the top recipients of US military and non-military aid ever since, just behind Israel. But while the Abraham Accords were a stunning breakthrough, a peace deal with Saudi Arabia would be more far-reaching for Israel, and here's why. Saudi Arabia is not only the region's economic powerhouse, it's also a home to the 2 holiest sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina. Therefore, the symbolism of a peace deal with Israel, the Jewish state, is enormous. As Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in an address to the UN National Assembly recently, a peace deal between the 2 countries, and I quote, will encourage a broader reconciliation between Judaism and Islam, between Jerusalem and Mecca, and between the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael. Now, while there is truth to Netanyahu's statement, it's important to take it with a pinch of salt. As I'll discuss later, Iran, which is not an Arab state, but a regional power through Shia Islam, is bitterly opposed to an alliance between its 2 regional rivals, Saudi and Israel, and backs militia groups in the region, including Hamas and Hezbollah, based in Lebanon. Many pundits suspect that Iran orchestrated the attack by Hamas, but we'll get back to that. First, let's turn to each of the main players involved in this agreement and look at what they stand to gain from a deal and what obstacles they face in securing one. First up, we have Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia primarily wants protection from Iranian threats. Don't be fooled by the détente between Riyadh and Tehran signed in March. The 2 countries are bitter rivals and have supported opposite sides in conflicts across the region, including in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. In 2019, Iran-backed rebels in Yemen carried out drone attacks on 2 key oil installations inside Saudi Arabia. The attack knocked out more than half of Saudi's oil output, shook Saudi's stock markets, and showed just how vulnerable the country was to an external attack. Saudi's crown prince and de facto ruler, Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS as he's known, is said to have been shaken by the attack. In addition to security, MBS's other priority is to diversify Saudi's economy away from oil, which currently makes up 74% of all exports. Tourism, technology, and its stunningly ambitious and also controversial urban development project NEOM are all part of this vision. So for Saudi Arabia, a peace agreement with Israel is there to achieve both goals. As part of the negotiations, Saudi is asking for a security guarantee from the US. At the time of filming, the likelihood is the US will approve an accord that's similar to the one the US has with Japan, but will not agree to a NATO-like agreement. This means the US would pledge military support if Saudi were attacked, but Washington wouldn't go so far as to consider an attack on Saudi to be an attack on US soil, as NATO-style agreement stipulates. Additionally, it looks like the US will help Saudi to develop its nuclear energy program. Meanwhile, the US and Israel can provide Saudi with the technological innovations necessary to help Saudi diversify its economy. However, Saudi Arabia faces challenges. Saudi Arabia has previously stated that Israel must commit to a path for Palestinian statehood as a precondition to the agreement. This was reportedly a non-negotiable for the Saudis. However, it recently appeared that Riyadh had softened its stance. A Reuters article dated back on the 29th of September and citing 3 unnamed sources claimed that Saudi Arabia, and I quote, will not hold up a deal even if Israel does not offer major concessions to Palestinians in a bid for their statehood. But that was before the Hamas attack. On the 7th of October, the day of the attack, the Saudi Foreign Ministry released a statement calling for, and I quote, an immediate halt to the escalation between the two sides. Although the statement mentioned the, and I quote, deprivation of the Palestinian people of their legitimate rights, and nowhere condemned the actions of Hamas, the overall tone is restrained. By contrast, Qatar's foreign ministry issued a statement saying that Israel alone was responsible for the ongoing escalation of violence with the Palestinian people based on past actions. So it would seem that Saudi is still vying for peace with Israel. What's less clear is what their position towards the Palestinians will be as a result of this conflict. Will MBS demand or drop Palestinian concessions as a precondition to peace? This is the big question. Part of Saudi Arabia's calculation will be based on whether they expect to face blowback domestically or among Muslims across the world if they're seen as selling out to the Palestinians in pursuit of their own national interests. How strong this sentiment is depends on how Hamas and the IDF behave in the days and the weeks ahead.
We interrupt this programme for an emergency crypto weather forecast. Get ready for a whirlwind of savings. We're seeing some high-pressure sign-up bonus systems forming in the northeast, with some exchanges offering up to $40,000. In the south, we'll be seeing some heavy discounts on hardware wallets, so watch out for those if you're going to be out and about. And then in central areas, there's a high chance of trading fee discounts, which should be settling in later on, so be on the lookout for up to 60% off there. Lush! For a more comprehensive forecast, just visit coinbuilder.com/deals or use the link down in the description. These deals are red hot, so make sure to take all the necessary precautions. Well, that's all for today's forecast. Now back to the scheduled programme.
Next up, we have Israel. Israel stands to gain on multiple levels when it comes to a peace deal with Saudi Arabia. First off, as Netanyahu stated in his UN speech, it bolsters the prospects for a broader peace deal between Arab states and Israel. Beyond that, it also creates bulwark against Israel's regional nemesis, namely Iran. Israel and Saudi Arabia have already been cooperating when it comes to intelligence sharing for quite some time, but a more formal agreement would presumably expand this and open the potential for military cooperation down the line. Then there is the massive economic potential that a normalization in relations represent for the two sides. For context, Saudi Arabia's GDP is $1.1 trillion, according to the latest World Bank figures. By comparison, Israel's is $522 billion. A peace deal with Saudi Arabia would also be a major achievement for Netanyahu and perhaps help him to clean up his image. In case you're unaware, Israel's longest-serving prime minister is charged with fraud, breach of trust, and is accepting bribes in 3 scandals. Netanyahu is also getting a lot of criticism for the massive intelligence failure that enabled the Hamas attack. An editorial by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz goes so far as to say the Prime Minister, and I quote, bears responsibility for the war. For Netanyahu's government, the peace deal with Saudi is no longer top priority. The war trumps all other considerations. Yet how the war unfolds will have a real impact on what form the deal with the Saudis takes, or whether it goes through at all. One key part of this equation is Netanyahu's hard-right allies in government. Even before the outbreak of war, they resisted any prospect of concessions for the Palestinians as part of the negotiation process. Rather than removing illegal settlements, as demanded by the Saudis, they supported the expansion of Israeli settlements, annexing part of the West Bank and removing any prospect of a two-state solution. It's just 2 days in, but this war has already been described as devastating for the Israeli psyche. Many have likened this to Israel's 9/11. Anger is at peak levels. Both the ongoing war and the fact that Israel's cabinet contains, and I quote, one of the most extreme members of cabinets that I have ever seen, as Joe Biden puts it, means that a Saudi-Israel peace deal, in the short term, is all but off the table. The bigger question is whether, in the long term, the conflict actually spurs on a peace deal, and I'll cover that in the section titled Iran. For now, let's move on to Joe Biden and the US perspective. A breakthrough Middle East deal would be a major achievement for the Biden administration, particularly as they eye the presidential election in 2024. It would be on par with, or offer more bragging rights than the Abraham Accords, and would undoubtedly sit well among America's considerably influential pro-Israel electorate. Jewish Americans are, apparently, and I quote, ecstatic about the potential for such a peace deal, according to one influential rabbi. From a geopolitical standpoint, the deal not only isolates America's enemy, which is Iran, but more importantly, halts China's growing influence in the region. China, as you might be aware, brokered the détente between Iran and Saudi earlier this year. Both Middle Eastern states were effusive in their praise for China at the time, a fact that no doubt riled up the Americans. If the Israel-Saudi deal goes through, it would solidify the US economic as well as military relationship with Riyadh and keep China at bay. Washington is also hopeful they will secure 3 strategic waterways around the Arabian Peninsula. These are the Strait of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Suez Canal. As the New York Times op-ed points out, these channels are vital global shipping routes that hold considerable interest, not only for the US, but also for China. The Strait of Hormuz between Oman and Iran sees around 1/3 of the world's seaborne petroleum, and a significant portion of liquid natural gas pass through these waters. Notably, over 45% of China's annual oil imports pass through this waterway, according to the Times. Meanwhile, around 10% of global trade passes through Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the waterway between Yemen and Djibouti. Its importance to China can be seen by the fact that Djibouti hosts Beijing's only foreign military base. Then we have the Suez Canal. Approximately 12% of international trade, 10% of international oil and gas shipments, and 22% of container trade passes through the Suez Canal. Chinese vessels make up 10% of the traffic going through it. In total, 60% of Chinese exports to Europe go through the Suez. By strengthening the US-Saudi alliance, Washington goes a long way towards cementing its control of these waterways while preventing China from expanding its influence in these waters. However, despite the clear advantages of such a deal to the US national interest, Saudi Arabia is still viewed with suspicion by many decision-makers in Washington. An article by the Brookings think tank perhaps best summarizes it in a lingering sentiment in Washington. They said, and I quote, "In the end, policymakers would do well to remember that Saudi Arabia is a key partner, but not a friend. The United States and Saudi Arabia share many common interests, but they do not share common values or a common worldview." Although this article is dated in 2016, the sentiment lingers. That is not to say there haven't been some major changes in Saudi Arabia in recent years. There have. Under MBS, Saudi Arabia has implemented wide-ranging reforms, including allowing women to drive and allowing co-educational classrooms. However, the Crown Prince's reputation will forever be stained by the brutal murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Although MBS denies his involvement in the 2018 affair, A US intelligence report concluded at the time that the Crown Prince personally approved the murder. Moral reservations aside, some US policymakers are also concerned that the military concessions the Biden administration appear ready to offer Saudi Arabia are too broad. Without providing clear details, an unnamed source cited by Reuters believes that the US lawmakers might oppose these military pledges. Clearly, many of the details need to be ironed out. However, the key question lawmakers in DC will have to agree on is this: how far is the US prepared to go to ensure Saudi Arabia's security? Next, we have the Palestinians. However, I should note that by Palestinians, I do not mean Hamas. Rather, I'm referring to President Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian negotiators are looking for guarantees that the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank will be halted and defer plans for annexation. This is possible. They also want a sovereign Palestine state, the so-called two-state solution, but this is not on the table. On the economic front, the Palestinian Authority could see an influx of financial support, with Saudi Arabia anticipated to extend substantial economic aid as part of their agreement. Given their weak negotiation position, Palestinian representatives may back the deal despite it falling short of their ultimate ambitions. However, the Palestinian leadership lacks widespread support or even legitimacy. In fact, a 2021 poll revealed that 80% of Palestinians want President Abbas to resign. To give you an idea of just how bad the situation is, the poll was taken several months after Abbas called off the first Palestinian election in 15 years. The reason? Because his Fatah party was facing an embarrassing loss. Therefore, even if the potential peace deal receives that backing of the Palestinian Authority, it doesn't mean the Palestinian people themselves will be on board, as Hamas extremists demonstrated so brutally these past few days. Speaking of spoilers, we need to talk about the Iran factor. In case you need a reminder, Iran's levels of power extend across the region. It's complicated, but we'll try and summarize it as concisely as possible. Iran has extensive influence in neighboring Iraq. It supports and arms Houthi separatists in Yemen, which have attacked Saudi Arabia. It also bankrolls, arms, and trains Hezbollah, Lebanon's dominant political and military power, which threatens Israel and undermines Saudi's allies in Lebanon. Meanwhile, the Syrian government arguably owes its survival to Iran and Russia. Without their support, the Syrian government might have been toppled during the Syrian civil war. And we haven't even mentioned Hamas yet. Not only does Iran arm and finance Hamas, but Iranian security officials reportedly helped to plan the attack and gave it the go-ahead several days prior. Scuppering the Saudi deal was almost certainly part of Iran's plan. And in the short term, it has undoubtedly been successful. A Saudi peace deal is extremely unlikely in and during the immediate aftermath of this conflict. That said, the conflict might, in the longer term, be seen to have contributed to a peace effort. After all, if there is one thing that Saudi and Israel can agree on, it's their shared animosity of Iran and their desire to both weaken Iranian proxies across the region and prevent Iran from building a nuclear missile. Fast forward a few years, and we could see a peace deal between Iran and most Sunni-majority countries. But we could also see a Middle East where not only Israel is equipped with a nuclear missile, but also potentially Iran and Saudi Arabia. And that is not a reassuring prospect. That's about it for today, guys. So what did you think of the video? Grappling with the intricacies of Middle Eastern politics is fraught with potholes and sensitivities, and we really wanted to present the facts as objectively as possible. Let us know how you think we did in the comments below. Also, tell us about the potential peace agreement. Do you think it will pass? And if so, how could it transform the region? Before you go, if you like this video and you learned something from it, then please like it, please share it, and please make sure you subscribe to both Coin Bureau and Coin Bureau Clips. Also, you can head over to the Coin Bureau Deals page, where you can find the best discount deals and the finest crypto merch that there is. It helps support our channel and lets us continue to provide you with the best crypto and macro content that's out there. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you all next time.